Okay, welcome back to history. We're up to 1974-75, which means we're up to some kind of famous things and some kind of fun stuff too, and we'll get into that. They did a division realignment based on the fact this league goes to 18 teams, and they also changed the playoff format based on the fact the league is now at 18 teams. We're pretty close to where the NHL is going to end up in the 80s, but the divisions are still a mess. The Norris division, Adams division, Patrick division, Smythe division. Names that are very near and dear to my heart because when I started watching hockey, that's what the divisions were. The divisions, though, don't look anything like what they're going to be. The Norris division is comprised of the Montreal Canadiens, who finished with 47-14-19 record, followed by the LA Kings, who are 42-17-21, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are 37-28-15, Detroit, that's 23-45-12, and then the Washington Capitals, who have a woeful record of 8-67-5. So we've gone to an 80-game schedule, and the Caps only win 8 of them. And a division that has Montreal, LA, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Washington doesn't make sense. The Adams division. Buffalo finishes first at 49-16-5. The Boston Bruins at 40-26-14. The Bruins' days of winning the Cup are over. They'll have a run to the finals along the way, but their days of winning the Cup are over. The Toronto Maple Leafs 31-33-16, and then the California Seals 19-48-13. So not a whole lot of tension as to who's going to make the playoffs in that division that year. California misses the playoffs. Toronto probably very grateful that they're in that division and not the Patrick. So California, Toronto, Boston, and Buffalo are a division. No, it doesn't make sense. Patrick division, Philly leads that one at 51-18-11. They're the only team with 50 wins that year. Followed by Followed by the Rangers, 37-29-14. Then the Islanders, who are starting to get their bearings about them, 33-25-22. Then the Atlanta Flames at 34-31-15. Atlanta's interesting because they're above 500 and they miss the playoffs, while Toronto and Chicago are below 500 and they make the playoffs. In the Smythe division, Vancouver 38-32-10, St. Louis 35-31-14, Chicago 27-35-8, Minnesota 23-50-7, and then the woeful Kansas City Scouts 15-54-11. So between the two expansion teams, they win a grand total of 23 games, showing that they really didn't have a whole lot of talent to choose from, and their records are indicative of the fact that we've really reached saturation point with expansion, and there won't be any real expansion again until 1991, because I don't look at 1980 and see it as expansion as much as it's an incorporation of another league. So the top 3 in each division make the playoffs, as pointed out with the red line here, and the division winners get a bye into round 2. So that's Montreal, Buffalo, Philly, and Vancouver. They're seeded 1 through 8 in the preliminary round, which is a best of 3 series, to reach that next round where the other division winners are waiting for them. In the quarterfinals, they're then reseeded between 1 through 8. So even though Vancouver wins their division, they end up actually being a number 6 seed in that next round. The WHA gets an honorable mention here for the fact they created a Canadian division, something the NHL considered doing at one point because American owners didn't find that their gate receipts were as high when Canadian teams came to town, and they wanted to change that. I'm talking late 80s, early 90s. But a Canadian division didn't work because, again, you have incredible travel costs and times involved with that, which is why, looking back, Montreal and LA, that one really stands out. And Toronto and California, it's so weird that the NHL, when they had a chance to reorganize everything and fix it, they go, nah, we can't really put LA, California, and Vancouver together because they're not very... I mean, I'm thinking their thought process was we don't want to have all the bad teams in the same division. But, eventually, years and years from now, the NHL has to ask, screw it, put all the bad teams in the Southeast. So, May 24th, 1974, the Philadelphia Flyers, fresh off of a Stanley Cup, acquire Reggie Leach from the California Seals because the Seals are the team that keeps on giving to everybody else. So think about the players they've lost. Think about the draft picks that they've traded away, and now they're giving up Reggie Leach. The California Seals would have been a very good team if they'd been run correctly. No excuse. March 26, 1975, the Capitals reach a new record of 17 straight losses. 17 in a row. That's over a month of just losing. There's no ties. None of these are in overtime because there's no overtime in the NHL yet. These are just regulation losses. I don't see that record ever being beaten. But on March 28th of that same year, the Capitals win in Oakland to get their only road win of the year. So the only place that Washington can win is Oakland, home of the California Seals. Again, the team that keeps on giving to everybody else. Not to their own fans, though. April 26th of 1975, the New York Islanders complete a very unlikely comeback. They were down 3-0 against Pittsburgh and came back and won it in 7. Then they almost did it to Philly in the next round. They were down 3-0, and it ended up being a 7-game series. So the Islanders show just how strong they're going to be in the playoffs, but they're going to end up with a reputation as a team that can't quite get over the hump in the playoffs. They're going to get over that, though. The Hart Trophy goes to Bobby Clarke of the Flyers. The Art Ross goes to Bobby Orr of the Bruins, who also wins the Norris. So the Norris Trophy is just Bobby Orr's at this stage of the game. The Calder goes to Eric Vale of the Atlanta Flames, a guy that I was a fan of when I started watching hockey. Vezina goes to Bernie Parent of the Philadelphia Flyers. Remember, the Vezina Trophy is still given for lowest goals against average in the league. The Lady Byng goes to Marcel Dion of the Detroit Red Wings. So he's not a king yet, but he will be soon. The Masterton goes to Don Luce of the Buffalo Sabres. The Lester Pearson Award goes to Bobby Orr. So the NHLPA says Bobby Orr is the best, and the writers say that Bobby Clarke's the most valuable. That's how that works. The Conn Smythe Trophy goes to Bernie Parent of the Flyers, and then the Patrick Award, which is for growing the game in the States, goes to Donald M. Clark, Bill Chadwick, and Tommy Ivan, coach of the Chicago Blackhawks back in the day. First team All-Stars are Bobby Clarke of the Flyers, Guy Lafleur of the Canadiens, Rick Martin of the Buffalo Sabres, Bobby Orr of the Bruins, Denny Potvin of the Islanders, and Bernie Parent of the Flyers. Your second team All-Stars, Phil Esposito of the Bruins, Rene Robert of the Buffalo Sabres, Steve Vickers of the Rangers, Guy Lapointe of the Montreal Canadiens, Borje Salming of Toronto. So your first European-trained and European-style player that's come over that actually gets onto this board as a second-line defenseman. And then Rogie Vachon is the second-team goaltender. Now, the playoffs, as I said, it's a 1-8 seeding, so this is kind of what people want. Toronto upsets LA in a 3-game prelim, 2-1. Chicago then comes out and upsets Boston in the preliminary round, 2-1. Pittsburgh wipes out St. Louis, 2 straight games. The Islanders upset the Rangers 2-1. So of these 4 series, 3 of them are upsets. This is why we have 7-game series now, because over a 3-game series, upsets are far more likely. Quarterfinals, Philadelphia sweeps Toronto in 4, so Toronto gets that upset win over LA and doesn't go very far. Buffalo wins in 5 over the Chicago Blackhawks. Montreal rewards Vancouver for finishing first in their division by taking them out in 5. And it really wasn't a close series. Vancouver, it's sort of legendary, this, and it's sad, kind of. But based on the fact that this team won't have a very strong next 20 years, this is seen as sort of a banner season for the Canucks. And yet they're out in their first playoff series in 5. The New York Islanders, as stated, the asterisk means that comeback. They beat the Penguins in 7. And then in the semifinal, they extended Philly to 7 as well. Buffalo beats Montreal in 6. So we've got 2 expansion-era teams in the Stanley Cup Finals, and that's the first time that's happened. Philadelphia wins at home 4-1 and 2-1, and then Game 3 happens. So Buffalo played out of the odd. The auditorium was a wonderful arena with a very tiny ice surface compared to other arenas. It's when ice wasn't all uniform. Boston and Buffalo had a smaller ice surface than the other teams. And they used that to their advantage. They had big bruising teams, and they used their ice surface to their advantage. Buffalo would take that to a whole other level. It's a May evening. It's a warm May evening. And the odd didn't have air conditioning. So what happens with an ice surface when there's no air conditioning and it's hot? You get fog. A lot of fog. But before the fog, there was a bat. There was a bat that lived in the odd. There were a lot of bats around the odd. And of course, this would not happen now. I don't think this could happen now. But the odd had a lot of bats in it, and there was one that It could very well be that because it was really hot up in the rafters and was cooler down below, that it wanted to be down below. So it starts flying down closer and closer to the ice, and when it got close enough, Jim Lawrence of the Sabres sticked it out of the air, and it died when it hit the ice. I believe it was Rick McLeish that started stick handling the dead bat and then thought better of it and picked it up and dropped it in the Philly penalty box. But there's your Fog and Bat game, which is won by Buffalo in overtime 5-4. Bernie Parent said after he just didn't see the shot. By the time he saw the shot, it was over. And you know, having fog rising off the ice, it's amazing that anybody could see anything in that game. And by today's standards, I would think the NHL would call the game off. I really do. I think that if there was fog like that on the ice, I think the NHL would stop the game for safety reasons or whatever. Game 4, Buffalo uses home ice again to win 4-2, so they tie the series at 2 with the Flyers. The Buffalo Sabres are in this. The French Connection line looks fantastic. Gilbert Perreault's not on the first or second team in this because, of course, you got Bobby Clark and Phil Esposito, two of the best in the game. The Flyers win at home 5-1 to take a 3-2 series lead, and then they shut out Buffalo in Game 6. So Bernie Parent shuts her down in Game 6, gets himself the Conn Smythe to go with his Vezina, and the Flyers win their back-to-back championships, which to them must have felt like, hey, we've got the start of a dynasty here. Goals leader, Guy Lafleur, has 12, even though Montreal doesn't make the final. He's still the leader in goals. Assists, Jade Drouin with 12, Bobby Clark with 12 as well. Points, Rick McLeish leads the way with 20. Your wins leaders, Bernie Parent gets 10, and Chico Resch ends up with 8 to finish second. So again, the New York Islanders putting the league on notice, and Chico Resch starting to show up on some leaderboards as well. Let's discuss Washington and Kansas City, because I had to look this over again. And I know I did this in the Washington video where I talked about their first year. And, you know, sorry, Adam, but I'm going to go through this again. Washington gets 8 wins. They're over Chicago, California, Toronto, Detroit, the Rangers, Kansas City, California, and Pittsburgh. So of their 8 wins, 2 of them are against the Seals, you know, the team that keeps on giving. One of them is against Kansas City, the other expansion team. And, yeah, Toronto ends up being on both boards here because when you look at Kansas City, Kansas City's wins were as follows. Washington, St. Louis, the Islanders, Vancouver is in between these two. I missed one when I was looking through them. So it's Vancouver, California, Detroit. So Detroit's on both. Minnesota, Washington again. And this was 3 wins in 4 games. So they beat Detroit and Minnesota back-to-back, and then they beat Washington after losing a game. So they weren't as miserable as Washington, but they were close. So Chicago, Boston, Toronto, California. So 2 over California. Washington, Minnesota, LA, and Vancouver. So of the 23 wins that the expansion teams got, 4 of them were against California. And 4 of them were against each other. So as bad as it looks, it's actually kind of worse than it looks. And this was just how this season turned out for Kansas City and Winnipeg or Washington. And it's not going to get a lot better. It really isn't. Your number 1 draft pick that year is Mel Bridgman. He played 977 career games. He finished off as a Canuck. 252 goals, 449 assists for a grand total of 701 points. A very solid player, not necessarily spectacular. Definitely not a first number 1 draft pick flop by any means. But Bridgman came in, and it was funny because, again, much like Pat LaFontaine joining the Islanders later on, Mel Bridgman coming in and being added to the Flyers made them look even stronger. But they don't win another Stanley Cup. But there you go, the 1974-75 season. Some very interesting storylines on here. And, yeah, I would imagine these videos will probably get longer. And for people who are wondering, at some point I'll do videos where I discuss the season in one video and then I discuss the playoffs in another. Because eventually you get to that point where there's so many stories that they have to be separate stories. But for today and for now, this is the 74-75 season. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And I'll talk to you again soon.